All right, how's everyone doing? I am Rich CELENZA. Thanks for tuning in to the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? So, the podcast that I want to do today is something that I've been thinking about for a very long time, and I just got a couple other texts again regarding this subject. And the subject is what type of workouts should my kids be doing? What types of exercises? How do I help my son or daughter build strength and muscle without obviously damaging their growth throughout their youth? Because I think there's a lot of things when it comes to children or parents being afraid to teach their children as far as getting a lot of muscle mass or just stunting their growth or whatever the hell these theories are with fitness. And so that's what I'm going to get into today. And I'm going to give you a little backstory. So I really started working out at around 5 or 6 years old. I was very fortunate. My mother moved to an area, and right behind me was a monster field, and I think one of the biggest YMCAs, not only in Illinois, but I think the Midwest. And my mother was very into fitness back then for some reason. Not sure why, but she loved yoga. She played tennis. I think they started playing handball and racquetball too at the YMCA. And she was a member of the Chicago Health Club, which was like one of the first gyms that I've ever seen in my life back in the early 70s. So she was into fitness. I just think she's a very strong woman in like strength and power. And so I would be going to the YMCA sometimes with her, and then I can actually even run across the field. I wouldn't even tell her 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And I would sneak into the Y. And back then, even though, how do I say this, equipment is nothing like it is now, it was a pretty decent sized little, it wasn't even little, it was a gym. And what happened in the 70s is then they built a nicer kind of quality gym that competed with the Chicago Health Club down the street in LaGrange. That's where was all happening, which is a suburb about 18 miles west of Chicago. And there's a lot of wealth actually in LaGrange. Just a very beautiful downtown, upper middle class. And so they took a lot of shitty equipment and they stuck them in some open areas that they had vacant, which were like racquetball rooms that needed to be remodeled or handball rooms. And then they had a beautiful gym. And this is back in the 70s. They also, they had a regular size pool with a diving board that I used to actually be on a diving team. And then they made an Olympic size pool. That may have been in the 80s. But I think all this was going down in the 70s. They had tennis courts on the outside. And get some water here. But I was always swimming, playing tennis, always hanging out at the YMCA, in the field as well. A lot of people would come there. And then my mother was always signing me up for sports my entire life. I played soccer, I think originally, first, second grade, Pop Warner football. And we played floor hockey, basketball, baseball, softball, tennis, wrestling. We boxed. My buddy still owns one of the best boxing gyms, or I think the best boxing gym in Chicago. I wasn't a very good boxer, but I was pretty good at wrestling. I would have been the perfect fit actually for MMA, but I was always involved in sports. I'm sure I'm missing some. I've been obsessed with sports my whole life. But what I started to do at a very young age, because of my father, he used to tell me this, because he owned a nightclub, and he had friends that were guys that were in and out of the joint, some regulars, prison dudes, charged for many different things, and they would go in prison, he'd say very thin or whatever, and then they'd come out huge, and he would talk about, these guys, what they would do in prison, and they would lift weights, which he always said, you want to get big, you want to get strong. And he was an athlete, and he went to a military school in Illinois, which was one of the best schools in the state, Bishop Porter. He was a exceptional athlete, my father. He boxed. He was a heavyweight boxer. He also swam and played, I think he played softball, and then he blew his knee out. I don't think he could play football. So he was really into pushing me at a very young age, and I was always so small. I was like a little runt. I talk about it on all my podcasts, how small I was, but I was pretty strong for my size. And then before my mother and father got a divorce, which they separated when I was like 5 years old, my mom got my father a bench press, but my father, they made a bomb and it blew up, and he only has a few fingers on one hand. But he would be able to bench and then curl. So when they got a divorce, I ended up with the bench. I have no idea how, but I used to sleep on it, and I ended up with these weights. in the early 70s or mid 70s. They were just filled with sand. And one of my cousins on the south side of Chicago was into bodybuilding. And he had these magazines that I'd never seen before. It had like Franco Columbu, Arnold, old timers, big time old timers. Frank Zane. Sorry about that with my voice. Yeah. And they would show more or less them just kind of posing and things in that nature. And then I would get comic books in the old school comic books in the back. They would show a guy kicking some sand in a guy's face and how all of a sudden he went from a puny guy to a big guy, and that appealed to me. So I started to lift some type of weights. I guess you could say 6, 7, 8 years old, but not seriously. I didn't know what I was doing on this equipment. I was too short. But I would kind of emulate and see what I saw in magazines, especially with curling and squatting. Not even squatting, bench pressing, curling. My father taught me some stuff with my triceps. He always pushed me to have powerful triceps and legs. I did a ton of swimming and just played sports constantly. Then I want to say at around junior high is when I started to lift weights like every day. I just was sick of being so small. I was the smallest kid in my junior high again. And I remember when I wrestled kids, even bigger kids, I'd lift them and slam them. I wanted to play football. I was doing pretty well. It was crazy. I was a middle linebacker, and then I was also a running back in Pop Warner football. And then I was getting ready to play. I wanted to play high school football, and I just was not growing. I was like 95 pounds. I couldn't even I was like, those are the positions I wanted to play. I couldn't even go play high school football. I was absolutely miserable. My dream was to become like basically Dick Butkus and Walter Payton. And that wasn't happening. I was shattered kind of. My family's huge Chicago Bears fans. I wanted to play on the Bears in Soldier Field. I still go there quite frequently, and I love it. It's probably my favorite place in the world is to go watch the Chicago Bears play football, but with my family members. But a lot of my family members were athletes. They were a lot bigger than me. But as time went on, I just was not getting bigger. But I started lifting weights. I also didn't know I was doing full body parts and all these different things, experimenting at like 12, 13, 14 years old, never stopped. Then in high school, I ended up having to come to Florida for summer school. And there were a lot of big dudes at Florida and a lot of really good gyms. A lot of gyms had professional wrestlers, arm wrestlers. They had boxers, a lot of bodybuilders, and powerlifters. We used to go to a certain gym called Body Masters back then. There was an Orange Avenue gym downtown Orlando, which was the original, I think, gym opened up in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. Hardcore guys, and Florida was just not a place to mess around. Everybody was a monster. And I loved it. And I would live at the gym. And even if I didn't go to that gym, if I was doing something touristy, like going to Wet n Wild that day, Disney or whatever, I'd work out in a hotel gym, which were, whatever. But I loved going to the gym, and I ended up meeting a friend in high school who taught me to do different body parts per day because I was kind of doing full body workouts. But the reason I'm describing all this is because I've been through the gamut, I think, of playing so many different sports and lifting weights at so many different ages and how it's affected me. And now that I have a lot of friends, family members too. Wow, I have so many family members that have children. So I'm going on 50. On one side of my family, I'm the oldest. And on the other side, as far as cousins go, I'm one of the youngest. But on one side of my family, there's probably 180 cousins. So I'm at the place where all my younger cousins and even my older cousins, some of them are all having kids or their kids are having kids. So I'm like the older uncle on some, the younger uncle on the other, younger cousin on the other, older cousin on the other. So it's kind of all over the place, but there's tons of children from all different ages. And a lot of my family members know I love fitness and I've been working out my whole life. And I love children and I love helping them. So when I go to a family picnic, family doings, parties, anything, a lot of these parents, my cousins, friends or whoever, they want to talk about, their kids playing sports. Some of my friends have even had kids that are, we talk about fitness all the time with them. I've been over the years. He went on, I don't know if he's going to end up a professional baseball player, but he's doing exceptional. And then I have some other friends coming up that their sons are playing exceptional baseball, very high level. soccer, and other sports as well. I have parents that even their kids are in fencing, all the way down to swimming, down to soccer. No, maybe I said soccer. A lot of baseball, and just football as well. So we're always talking about what's best for their kids. I get texts all the time. I think sometimes too, a lot of kids I don't think necessarily want to always listen to their parents, but I will talk to them, and for some reason they will listen to me, or we'll at least have discussions about it. And I'm a no-nonsense type of person, regardless. I don't mess around with that, and I want to kick it in the ass for them. Or they'll be texting me, and I just send texts. Some of these parents, too, they ended up setting up gyms in their houses, but they have, a lot of them already coaches, obviously, with the teams they're in. But I think when it comes to muscle mass or getting their kids stronger, that's one of the questions I basically ask the most, especially even when they're 10, 11, 12, 13, in that age bracket where you don't really want them to start getting too serious about weightlifting, or they don't want them to. But I'm going to tell you something. I lifted weights my whole life, basically. I wasn't super serious, but at 12 years old to now I'm 50, I never stopped. Did that take a toll on me? Yeah, it did. Especially my tendons and joints. One of the things I've been putting up on YouTube more than anything is when you work out, your number one thing is to prevent injuries and learn to work out for longevity. I don't care if your son's 5, 10, 15, 20, or daughter. You want to teach them to get strong and do it right and look at the long-term game. I did a lot of things sometimes for short-term, more ego-driven, especially in my 20s when you start lifting a lot of weight. At least for me it was, when you start trying to bench 450 pounds, you're squatting 500 pounds for reps, leg pressing 1,500 pounds, trying to deadlift 500 pounds. These type of things took a toll on my back. Again, it took a toll on my entire body. But I wasn't looking long term. I really didn't think I'd live that long. I thought I'd live to 40 years old, 30, 40-ish, for some reason. And not sure why, but that's just what I felt. But the one thing I would tell parents or kids is do not beat yourself to death. I think a lot of things that I was doing, it was almost, it was like a badge of honor if I played football and got hurt almost, or I wouldn't even say hurt, but I was like really banged up, or I banged somebody else up, or if we boxed, if I had a headache, I knew that I got hit and I hit somebody, or, even, you just know, even lifting weights, there's a difference between being sore and then pulling something or damaging your body. But when you're younger, you don't really notice because you heal so quickly. And one little injury, another little injury, or one little strain here, you pull your back out here, you do this and that. And before you know it, 10, 20 years, you're not looking down the line, you're in bad shape. And I think this happens with a lot of young athletes. So that's one thing I would say is really, you want to make sure whatever you're doing with your kids, and I know a lot of you are going to be like, yeah, no shit, we don't want to damage our kids. We don't want our kids hurt. But you got to realize your kids sometimes, I think, want to impress their coach, their parents, whatever, other family members, other players, and they sometimes will go too far. And you don't realize that. And I'm all down for telling the kids you got to kick it in the ass and raise the intensity and be the best you can be. But there's also a point in time with sports, I think, where they have to accept losing. Everyone loses. And when you lose, that basically losing is the best thing, I think, for anyone, but especially children. The more they lose, the more I think they value a win. And I just did a podcast that I hated losing more than I liked winning. But when you keep losing, it creates you into the person you're going to become. Because if you're losing, most likely either you're competing against people that are a higher level than you that you want to get to, which is a good thing. But then again, I'm not going to lie and say, hey, maybe you're just not that athletic. You're just getting beat to death. And in that case, that can happen. Again, then you're going to have to figure out a way how to become superior. If you're winning all the time, or if your kid always thinks he's a winner, which there's nothing wrong with thinking you're a winner. Maybe I'm wording that incorrectly. But if your kid's always winning, and I've seen this with a lot of kids. I've seen it when I played sports, or they're big and dominant. What happens is eventually when they do start losing, they can't handle it. But I think by developing it's more mental than it is physical. I think just sports, just in general, or athletics, you being beaten down, and I don't mean physically beaten down, but you losing, and you taking your lumps, and you losing playoffs, finals, you know, all these different types of things make you into somebody who wants to keep achieving more. Those are usually the ones I think that are going to keep going. Because as you could tell, as you get older, or even when you're younger playing sports, a lot of people quit sports. And maybe because they lost interest, but I think a lot of it's emotional, and you lose, and before you know it, like anything else, you quit. You may quit that sport, you may quit that team, whatever the case may be. But I actually just did was it a podcast or a YouTube video? I might have done both, but let me get some water here. And I talk about you may be more athletic than you think, because I think what happens with a lot of kids that end up parents, they weren't athletic in their youth and they wanted to be. But maybe the sports that they were involved in at their school, or things that, whatever they were doing, they just couldn't make the team. They just didn't excel. They may have been too small, too weak, not that coordinated, overweight, whatever the case may be. But when you get older, you got to realize you're not that same person. Okay? So you're a lot more stronger, hopefully mentally stronger, and you realize as an adult you can do a lot more than as a child. But I think what you have to install in your children is every year is a different year. Every day is actually a different day. Every month. I thought about, I would just, because I was so small, I didn't necessarily want to play soccer. I just played it in high school for a couple of years because I wanted to, there was nothing else to really other sports. And I played soccer when I was younger so I could excel in it. I know I could easily be a starter. And I was pretty decent in soccer. So I knew I'd be fine with that. And then I ended up wrestling instead of playing basketball. Again, I felt too short, which was quite interesting because I could dunk, like freshman, sophomore year, I started dunking tennis balls, or was that junior year? I could jump so high, I was just too short. And then I played tennis as well. I even went to the number one tennis academy in the world, Nick Bollettieri, which I learned a ton about myself, which this is kind of ironic, and I'll tell you this. So, I was in Chicago and I would bounce between the city, which, people, when I was in the city, people thought I was a suburb kid. Then when I was in the suburbs, people thought I was a city kid. It was quite ironic. But I played tennis a lot, and I even played indoor tennis because back to Chicago, when winter comes, you only have a few options, especially back in the 70s and 80s. It's not like it is now, but you played basketball, or you could play hockey, which wasn't as popular as you think back in the 70s and 80s. We had floor hockey, which I thought was more popular. And then if you wanted to play indoor tennis. Now, you could play indoor soccer. That was, again, far and few between the clubs. But I played tennis because we had a nice tennis club down the street, so I could play it outside and inside. And then what was quite interesting, I think I was a freshman going into my sophomore year, but I went to Nick Bollettieri. I might have been a sophomore going into my junior year. Can't remember. Agassi was there. Courier was there. A lot of pros were there. Unbelievable. I didn't get to play with them. They were in a whole separate group. They were just elite. But within my group, I was one of the smallest kids again. There were some great tennis players, not just from the United States or North America. I'm talking globally. We have guys from China, Australia, all over the place. And what was interesting is they had a gym, and then we'd have to do the workout in the gym. And I dominated everybody because I always worked out with weights. I didn't have the coordination yet to play tennis to the level they did. I also only played tennis for, say, 5 years at that point. These kids started playing tennis at kindergarten, first grade, second grade, so they had more skill than me. A lot of them, too, most of them were all taller than me, and a lot of them were more mature than me, even though we were almost all the same age. And I'm sitting there at 5 feet, 5'1", and these guys are 6 foot. So, but I ended up not liking tennis after a while. I just got sick of it, but I did love playing one-on-one sports. I loved wrestling. But the one thing I was going to say was I ended up getting, growing to 5'10". Now, if I would have stuck with tennis, because they asked me to move there, they ask you if you're going to camp there, if you'd like to live and make this your profession. I didn't want to make tennis a profession. But what I found quite interesting is I wondered if I did stick with tennis, because I literally went from a 17-year-old kid who was 5'6", and then before you know it, I was 5'10", 220 pounds. And I couldn't even imagine if I would have kept the coordination, the power that I would have had compared to anybody else playing tennis. I probably wouldn't have the speed, but I'll tell you that I would have been a force to reckon with because I was already really strong. I was mid-grain, so I can only imagine what could have happened. But because of me lifting weights, I think throughout my whole life, just built me into this certain type of specimen. And I used to always hear when I was younger, and I think a lot of parents, I don't know if it's like, don't lift weights, it stunts your growth, what I was saying earlier, or don't lift weights because your muscle isn't ready for it. Don't do this physically. I could tell you from my own experience, and believe me, I am experienced in working out with weights or just sports in general, is I think you're only going to be able to do what you can do. Now, if you're going to train your son or kid to be a bodybuilder, maybe, that's ridiculous, I think, to a certain degree because they're not developed. But your kids, if they are working out with weights at a younger age, most likely they're playing a sport. So you want them to strengthen, those certain areas for that sport. But I just did a video again on, I think when you work out, you should never neglect any body part. So even if you play tennis, hypothetically, back to that, a lot of people just work on their arm strength, speed, and things in that. I didn't do that. Even in whatever sport I played, still to this day, I worked out my entire body because I wanted to build a foundation of just one human, one specimen that was powerful. I didn't want a weakness. I also think a lot of people, when they neglect certain body parts, that's where the injury becomes because they're strong everywhere except certain areas. So if this is like if your upper body's strong and you never do back, you could pull your back very easily. Or if you're top heavy, let's just say, and your legs are very weak and you neglect them, it's just you could hurt them. You could pull something. Those are things I think people should think about. But back to kids, I think the number one thing I would tell anybody or any parent is swim. I think swimming for anyone is the best. And I think for your entire life, the one thing you can do is get in that water because you have buoyancy. And I'm not just talking about swimming in the water, in a pool. I don't care if you go in the ocean, a lake or whatever, and doing laps, but you want to go underwater. You want to run in the water, front, back. I do side lunges. I did a YouTube video on this, and I think it's getting more and more popular. Lord Hamill, is that how you say his name? The professional Hawaiian surfer, globally known. He's doing a bunch of different things with water. And I even remember seeing videos years ago of like Navy SEALs or these military guys doing things in the water. So I never stopped swimming throughout my entire life. I usually only joined gyms that had pools. But if they didn't have a pool, I would still go swim. Especially in Florida, we used to pool hop all the time. So when I did belong to a hardcore gym, usually I belonged to one or two gyms at the same time. I would even join Wet n Wild, let's say Typhoon Lagoon, Blizzard Beach, anytime I could be in the water. But I wasn't an ocean guy, so I wasn't a guy who was surfing and things like that. But I would tell any parent, get your son, daughter, or whoever in that pool, have him work out in the pool, start looking on YouTube videos, different workouts. You want to get that hip movement and that resistance and that fluency and a balance. And they could do that for the rest of their life. It's not just now. But I think it's incredible for your breathing. I just think, and it works your entire body regardless what you're doing. And again, the buoyancy doesn't always take such a toll on your joints, especially if you're going to start running and punching even or any of these things. There's a fluency to it, and it's not so jarring, especially running in the water and doing different things. That'd be one thing I would definitely recommend. And a lot of parents I know, especially if they have wealthy parents, or if you're a wealthy parent, they build gyms in their homes, which is cool. But I had a gym in my house. I remember in my early 20s, my dad wanted to start working out, and we put a gym in his garage. He had a big enough garage. We got all this equipment. We sweated our ass off because it was Florida. But I realized it was cool to have that there. But I think for a lot of younger people, especially, to keep the interest there and to have the energy there, is you want to get your kids around other people that are fun, not so serious all the time, but like to work out, but get them in a gym environment, I think, because they get around people that are healthy, the kids can also see what, the gains other people have gotten. They can also be a little competitive with one another. They can also learn from one another. And it's more of an experience sometimes than just, say, going to the basement working out with their mom, their dad, or their brother, or whatever. Again, it's cool to have. But I do think, just for me, the people that I've noticed that usually for the most part keep up with working out and have fun actually doing it, and it becomes just a fun atmosphere, is going to a gym, signing them up for a gym. It also, in my opinion, too, like I'm going to go to the gym now in about a half an hour. But it's something to look forward to. And there's a lot of things that a gym offers that no matter how big your gym is in your home, it just has so much to offer. Back to the pool, jacuzzi, sauna, all different types of equipment, especially nowadays. It's just a great place. And again, you meet great people. Most of my closest friends to this day I met in a gym. We're all gym rats. And a lot of us work out. So that's another thing I would do if you have, and I'm not going to get too long in this, but here, if you have kids and you want them to get stronger, there are a lot of studies out there. But here's the thing. Your child is unlike probably any other child out there, because we are all different people, I believe, that live different lifestyles. Even though your kid may go to school or be on a team with a kid who may be the same size as him, same strength, same coordination, same skill level, whatever the case may be, he lives a different life than your son. I can assure you. He eats different foods, goes to bed at different times, mentally different, works out probably differently, different levels. Did I say nutrition? They're not the same person is what I'm saying. So I think people or parents need to start learning to study their own bodies and their children if they really want them to excel. See where their personal strengths and weaknesses are. Because my mom took a lot of interest in me, what I was doing as far as sports and things go. That was, now that I look back, that's wonderful. My mother wasn't on the academic tip that much, and I just don't think that's what she was interested in. It wasn't her fault, and she sent me to amazing schools so that was their job. And I tell my mom that all the time. She's like, oh, I wish I would have spent more time with you doing homework or this or that. The truth was, and it was the same as me with my kids, I'm not into the academic aspect. I love reading. I've written a couple books. I love education. I love all that. I'm not going to say I don't as I got older. But when I was younger, if my mother would have pushed so hard on academics, and I really wasn't that interested in it either, I wouldn't have had somebody taking me to all these sporting events and making these friends and becoming what I became physically. So tit for tat, I think she did an amazing job. I got to remind her of that and thank her for that, because I don't think a lot of kids realize, or parents nowadays, how much shit their parents go through or went through, especially for sports. I used to even have my uncles showing up for my football games, which was great. I mean, all those type of things. And I'm going to wrap it up here. I goof around with a lot of my friends, and I call them helicopter parents. Some of them, not all of them. And a lot of them like to travel with their kids. Amazing fathers, amazing mothers, tons of them. It goes from basketball, baseball, again, hockey, some in California with their surfing, all these different parents, football. And that's great. But sometimes I think being around your kids too much around their sports, I think becomes a little bit of a pain in the ass. We goof around and says when our parents showed up at our practices or some of our games, we thought we were in trouble in the 70s, which makes no sense. But it's kind of a joke. Our parents didn't have time to go to every game. And I'm not saying parents shouldn't go to every game or be coaches or whatever. But I do think sometimes parents don't realize in this day and age that they're a pain in the ass sometimes. I'm not going to say they're a burden. But sometimes kids need freedom being away from their parents, especially if their parents are the coach. And I think it could exhaust them. I used to have kids that their dad was always the coach every year, and they were always fighting and arguing, or, and they were great dads. Holy shit. A lot of them I was like, wow, this dad takes in such an interest and he wants to do everything for his kid. I get it. But if you're one of those parents that is always up your kid's ass, when, you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever the case may be. And I had a daughter that played 4 sports one year. And a couple times they're like, Rich, you're here all the time. Why don't you coach? And I says, no, because I'll take her here and I'll take an interest with her, and I'll practice with her when we leave here. But a lot of times I would just drop her off and go, say, Starbucks, or give her a break from me. I didn't need her always seeing me overlook everything she's doing right and wrong. I wanted her to have the times where she could grow on her own and be independent. So that's something I think some parents should really look at. And then you have other parents that never show up for any sporting events. So if you're one of those parents, get your head out of your ass. Try to show for your kids' sports once in a while. I got so sick of my mother showing, I used to lie to her, or not even lie to her. I wouldn't even tell her when all my games were. She was hysterical. I'd look over. She would be at every game. And again, that worked well for me because my father never really was around for a lot of my sporting events, which I'm not digging on him. He just lived a different lifestyle, owning a club and then living in Florida. But, yeah, so I'm going to do another one of these, I think, regarding this, maybe being more specific. But please, if you're a parent and you want your kid to excel or become bigger, faster, stronger, not only, in what he's doing now, but in the future, that takes time. And like I said earlier, you have to study your son or daughter and also get them around the best talent and coaching that you can, but also do not burn them out. There's a fine line there. Some of the best athletes I knew growing up, their parents burnt them out even back then, or their coaches burnt them out, where what became what they loved to do and fun became a job, and then eventually became misery. So the one thing they loved doing was the one thing they dreaded the most. So I'm going to wrap it up there, but just think about that as a parent, that sometimes, what your kid loved to do and was all excited to do, and you may be excited to do it too. Be very aware of how you're behaving towards that. Even when my kids lost, as long as I knew, and they both played sports, but even when they lost, if I could see they did their best, I'd go celebrate. And you're talking about a guy who despised losing. Our family was called the Sore Losers as a joke. I even had a clothing line called Sore Loser Wear. It was a clothing line for people who hated to lose. It doesn't matter if you win or lose as long as you come in first. My kids knew that I despised losing with a passion, but they also knew, more than anything, all I wanted them to do was be their best. It was kind of a joke, like I just talked about. Everyone loses. My kids, I could just tell emotionally when they lost, they were upset sometimes, and we'd go to Disney after. I'd take them anywhere because I'm like, this is good that you lost, and you're going to learn. I know the way you feel right now, you're miserable just like anybody else, and I'm not trying to replace something fun and take that emotion away, but I wanted them to know there is definitely more to life than just, sports. I wanted them to go to bed on a high note and look forward to the next game and look forward to the next day. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. If you get a chance, definitely check out my YouTube channels. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. Yeah, that's all I got for you, parents. Kick it in the apps. All right, take care, and I wish you nothing but the best.